Episode 8, the day after, October 29th, 1962, the day that almost was. If Vasily Arkhipov had voted differently in B-59, if Stanislav Petrov had followed protocol in 1983, if any of the dozens of other individuals at critical moments had made the wrong decision, let's try to imagine what that day would have been like after. The story that almost happened, the apocalypse we almost experienced. It's October 29th, 1962, but in an alternate universe where things turned out differently, where the nuclear torpedo was launched, where Kennedy ordered the airstrike and the invasion, where the escalation was unstoppable. In this alternate timeline, it all begins with the B-59's nuclear torpedo. The 10-kiloton underwater blast instantly vaporizes the American destroyer USS Coney and its 300 sailors. Two other destroyers are devastated by the blast wave and radiation. In Washington, the news reached the Pentagon at 11 o'clock at night on October 27th. Kennedy was awakened. The ex-com held an emergency meeting. The generals don't need to say, "We told you so." Their faces say it all. Diplomacy has failed. The Soviets have attacked with nuclear weapons. The United States must respond. Kennedy, exhausted and defeated, gives the order he'd been trying to avoid for 13 days. Implement air attack plans. Prepare invasion forces. At 6 o'clock in the morning on October 28th, 1,200 U.S. aircraft took off from bases in Florida and aircraft carriers in the Caribbean. Their objective: to destroy all missile sites, air bases, and anti-aircraft defenses in Cuba in a massive, coordinated attack. But the Soviets are prepared. SA! 2 missile batteries fire dozens of anti-aircraft missiles. American planes fall from the sky. 52 are destroyed in the first 2 hours. But their bombs hit many targets. On San Cristobal, Soviet technicians are preparing SS-4 missiles for launch when the U.S. bombs hit. 2 missiles are destroyed on the ground, but a third is launched before the site is destroyed. The SS-4 lifts off from its platform in Cuba at 7 in the morning. Its target, pre-planned days before, is part of Soviet contingency plans. Miami, Florida. The flight time is 4 minutes and 30 seconds. U.S. early warning radar systems detect the launch immediately. Civil defense sirens are activated in Miami and surrounding areas. 2 million people have 4 minutes to seek shelter, but there aren't enough shelters. There isn't enough time. Most don't even understand what's happening when the sirens start wailing on Sunday morning. The missile carries a single 1-megaton warhead, approximately 70 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. It detonates 1,000 meters above downtown Miami at 7:04 in the morning. The fireball instantly vaporizes everything within a mile and a half. The Freedom Tower, the downtown skyscrapers, the harbor, and the surrounding neighborhoods disappear in a second. 150,000 people die instantly. The shock wave devastates everything within a 5-kilometer radius. Buildings collapse. Glass explodes. People are tossed through the air like rag dolls. Another 300,000 die in the following minutes. The mushroom cloud rises to 15,000 meters. Radioactive rain begins to fall on Miami Beach, Coral Gables, and Hialeah. Winds will carry it north, contaminating Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach, eventually reaching Georgia and the Carolinas. By the end of the day, 500,000 people will be dead or dying from the attack on Miami. And the nuclear war has just begun. Kennedy receives a report of the impact on Miami at 7:07. For a moment, he can't speak. The horror of what just happened, the realization that it was his decision to attack Cuba that triggered it, paralyzes him. But established procedures don't wait for personal reflection. The Strategic Air Command already has standing orders. Any use of nuclear weapons against U.S. territory will be met with massive retaliation. General LeMay is on the phone. "Mr. President, we must launch now. Any minute we wait, the Soviets could launch a first strike against us." Kennedy knows that LeMay is right according to the logic of nuclear war. If he waits, he could lose his ability to retaliate. He must use his weapons before they are destroyed in their silos and bases. At 7:15 a.m., Kennedy authorized the execution of the Single Integrated Operations Plan, known as SIOP. It is a United States nuclear war plan designed to destroy the Soviet Union's military capability in a single coordinated, massive attack at air bases across the United States, Europe, and on aircraft carriers around the world. 52 bombers take off with nuclear payloads. From silos in North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles are launched. Polaris missile submarines in international waters launch their payloads. It's 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. 900 minutes after the attack on Miami, 1,200 American missiles and bombers are on their way to the Soviet Union. Estimated time of arrival of the first missile to Soviet territory, 30 minutes. In Moscow, it's 3:30 p.m. Nikita Khrushchev is in a Politburo meeting when Soviet early warning systems detect a massive American launch. Radar screens show hundreds of incoming tracers. There's no doubt. It's a total decapitation attack designed to destroy the Soviet leadership, military forces, and major cities. Khrushchev has 15 minutes to decide before the first missiles hit. The Soviet generals demand immediate retaliation. "We must launch now, or we'll lose everything," shouts Marshal Malinowski, Minister of Defense. Khrushchev, the man who had tried to avoid this moment, who had withdrawn the missiles from Cuba to prevent exactly this, understands that there are no more options. The war has begun. The Soviet Union will be destroyed in the next 30 minutes. The only thing he can do is ensure that the United States does not survive either. At 3:35, Khrushchev authorizes the launch of the entire Soviet arsenal. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, medium-range missiles from Eastern Europe, strategic bombers, everything that can reach the United States or its allies. It's 3:40 Moscow time. 7:40 a.m. in Washington. 500 Soviet nuclear weapons are en route to the United States, Western Europe, and U.S. bases in Asia. The total time from the first nuclear torpedo to this moment of total retaliation, 8 hours and 40 minutes. Mutually assured destruction is no longer a theory. It's happening. In cities across the United States, civil defense sirens wail. Emergency broadcasts interrupt all radio and television programming. This is not a test. Nuclear attack confirmed. Seek shelter immediately. But there are no real shelters. 1950s bomb shelters are inadequate against modern weapons. Duck and cover instructions are useless against megaton warheads. In New York, 8 million people have minutes to do what? There's no evacuation possible. The roads are already blocked by panicked traffic. The subway is jammed with desperate crowds trying to get into the tunnels, as if that could save them. In Washington, helicopters evacuate the president and key leaders to underground shelters designed to survive near nuclear impacts. But most of the government, Congress, the federal bureaucracy, doesn't have access to these shelters. They'll stay above ground with everyone else. In Moscow and other Soviet cities, the same thing is happening. The party leadership heads for bunkers deep beneath the Kremlin. Ordinary citizens receive impossible-to-follow instructions and prepare for the end. At 8:05 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the first U.S. missile detonates over Engels Air Base south of Moscow. A 1-megaton explosion destroys the base and kills everyone within a 10-kilometer radius. It is the first of hundreds. For the next 20 minutes, both sides experience what they had theorized for years but never experienced: all-out nuclear war. By 8:30 in the morning, Eastern Time, the world as it existed has ceased to exist. In the United States, Washington, D.C., has been hit by 3 warheads, totaling 5 megatons. The city is a smoking crater. The Capitol, the White House, the Pentagon, all vaporized. 700,000 dead. New York City was hit 5 times. Manhattan is unrecognizable. 3 million died instantly. Another 2 million were fatally irradiated. Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, San Francisco, Boston, all destroyed by multiple impacts. Every major American city with a population over 500,000 has been attacked. All military air bases have been destroyed. Missile silo fields on the Great Plains are lunar landscapes of overlapping craters. In the Soviet Union, Moscow has been hit 10 times, turning it into a radioactive wasteland. 5 million dead. Leningrad, Kiev, Kharkiv, Minsk, all destroyed. All major military installations have been hit. The Black Sea Fleet has been annihilated in port. Industrial facilities in the Urals are on fire. In Europe, U.S. bases in West Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Turkey have all been attacked with Soviet nuclear weapons. European cities near military bases have been devastated by collateral damage. London, Paris, and Rome have all received warning attacks from medium-range missiles. 50 million people died in the first hour, but the carnage is just beginning. Nuclear explosions have generated firestorms in dozens of cities. In New York, the burning remains of buildings, fueled by gases from ruptured pipes and vehicle fuel, create an inferno that will consume what the initial blast didn't destroy. Winds generated by firestorms reach hurricane speeds, sweeping people, debris, and flames into vortices of death. Those who survived the initial explosions in basements or makeshift shelters now face incineration or asphyxiation from oxygen deprivation. Radioactive fallout begins to fall. Vaporized debris particles, now intensely radioactive, dragged into the stratosphere by mushroom clouds, begin to descend with the wind patterns. In the Great Plains of the United States, areas not directly hit but downwind of destroyed missile fields, radioactive fallout is falling like black snow. Farmers and small-town residents who thought they were safe, who saw the distant flashes and felt the earthquakes but survived, are now engulfed by lethal radiation. Thousands will die within days from acute radiation syndrome. Tens of thousands more will develop cancers that will kill them within months or years. Entire areas of the central United States will become uninhabitable for decades. The same thing is happening in Russia, where winds carry radioactive fallout from destroyed targets to populated areas that were not directly hit. By the end of the first day, 75 million people are dead. Another 50 million are fatally irradiated and will die within weeks. But these numbers, though incomprehensible, are not the end of the catastrophe. They are just the beginning. Firestorms in hundreds of cities have injected approximately 150 million tons of smoke and soot into the upper atmosphere. This smoke is different from ordinary smog. It is intensely black, produced by the burning of entire cities, and reaches altitudes where it will not be washed away by rain. In the following weeks, this smoke spreads globally, forming a layer that blocks sunlight. Temperatures are dropping dramatically. By December 1962, temperatures in the northern hemisphere had dropped an average of 20 degrees Celsius. It's like an instant ice age. Farming is impossible. Crops planted in the fall freeze to death. Food supplies are rapidly depleting. Global supply chains, already devastated by the destruction of all major cities and transportation systems, are completely collapsing. Hunger is spreading. In the United States, survivors of the nuclear attack in rural areas now face sub-zero temperatures in October, perpetual darkness, and a lack of government services or social structure. The strong prey on the weak. Violence over food and resources is endemic. In the Soviet Union, already accustomed to harsh winters, the nuclear winter is even worse. Without heating fuel, refineries and distribution systems were destroyed in the attacks. Without electricity, without food, millions are dying of cold and hunger. But the horror is not limited to the belligerent nations. China, which wasn't directly attacked, is facing its own apocalypse. Nuclear winter respects no borders. Temperatures in China are dropping as low as those in the United States and the Soviet Union. 600 million Chinese face famine. The government's vast rice stores are depleted within months. By the spring of 1963, tens of millions are starving to death. In India, 400 million people depend on subsistence farming, which is now impossible. Monsoons fail to arrive, disrupted by distorted weather patterns. Famine kills more people in India than all the nuclear bombs in the United States and the Soviet Union combined. In Africa, the situation is equally catastrophic. Crops fail completely. Governments collapse. Entire states cease to exist as functioning entities. South America, relatively untouched by direct attacks, still faces agricultural collapse and mass famine. By mid-1963, 8 months after the failed Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 billion people were dead, 1/3 of humanity. But tragedy as a final act. By 1965, 3 years after the nuclear exchange, the world's population had fallen from 3 billion to less than 1 billion. The cities remain in radioactive ruins. No one lives in them. No one will rebuild them for decades, perhaps centuries. Industrial civilization has collapsed. There is no electricity production on a significant scale. There is no manufacturing. There is no global trade. Humanity has regressed to a pre-industrial existence, but without the social structures and knowledge that made that existence possible. Small communities of survivors exist in remote areas that were not directly attacked, and where farming eventually became possible again when the smoke cleared and temperatures partially returned to normal. But they are isolated, struggling day by day to survive. Knowledge is lost. Libraries have been burned. Universities have been vaporized. Experts are dead. An entire generation of children is growing up without formal education, without books, without access to the accumulated knowledge of civilization. In the ruins of what was once Washington, D.C., now inhabited only by wild animals and vegetation that has begun to reclaim the land, one monument remains partially intact: the Lincoln Memorial. The statue of the president is fallen, broken by the blast, but the words carved into the marble wall are still legible. May peace last forever. It's a cruel irony. An epitaph for a civilization that had the wisdom to engrave that sentiment in stone, but not the wisdom to live it. This is the world that almost was. The future Vasily Arkhipov prevented with a vote. The apocalypse Stanislav Petrov prevented with a decision not to report a false alarm. This is the price humanity almost paid for its arrogance, its fear, its inability to resolve differences without threatening mutual annihilation. But this isn't our world. This didn't happen. In our timeline, Arkhipov voted no. Petrov reported the alarm as a system error. Kennedy chose quarantine over bombing. Khrushchev chose retreat over pride. Thousands of individual decisions, each made under extreme pressure. Each could have gone differently, but each was correct just enough to avoid catastrophe. It wasn't brilliance that saved us. It was luck, combined with just enough wisdom at critical moments. And now, more than 60 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, we faced a fundamental question. Have we learned our lessons? Or have we simply been lucky for longer than we deserve? Because the weapons still exist. 13,000 nuclear warheads, distributed among 9 nations, each capable of repeating the horror we just imagined. Early warning systems still generate false alarms. Political misunderstandings still occur. Regional crises still threaten to escalate. And now we have new threats: cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, proliferation to more states, and potentially to non-state actors. The last survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, now in their 80s and 90s, have spent their lives bearing witness, telling their stories of that August day in 1945 when the sky turned into fire. Setsuko Thurlow was 13 years old when the bomb fell on Hiroshima. She was a mile from the hypocenter. The blast threw her into the air. When she regained consciousness, she was trapped under the rubble of collapsed buildings, surrounded by dead or dying classmates. He managed to escape and survive. He has spent the next 80 years warning the world about what he saw that day: people walking like ghosts with skin hanging off their bodies, children crying for their mothers, rivers filled with corpses, hell on earth. In December 2017, Setsuko accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. In her speech, she said, "Every human being who dies as a result of nuclear weapons is not a number. It's a person who had hopes and dreams, a family who loved them. Governments that possess nuclear weapons are willing to burn tens of millions of these people alive for political gain." Yasuaki Yamashita was 14 years old when the bomb fell on Nagasaki. He was 2 kilometers from the hypocenter. His younger sister died in his arms days later, her body covered in radiation burns. People can't imagine the horror, Yamashita says. They think they understand because they've seen photos. They've read descriptions. But they can't imagine the smell of hundreds of thousands of burning bodies. They can't imagine the sound of an entire city screaming. They can't imagine being a 14-year-old boy holding your sister as she dies and not being able to do anything to help her. These testimonies are what Kennedy and Khrushchev heard in their minds during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They're what gave them the courage to back down when everyone was pressing them to move forward. But soon, there will be no more direct testimony. The Hibakusha are dying, and with them, the last direct link to the horror that nuclear weapons can cause. Some argue that nuclear weapons have preserved peace, that mutually assured destruction has prevented major wars between great powers for more than 70 years. And there's truth in this. There hasn't been a third world war. There hasn't been a direct conflict between superpowers since 1945. But it's also true that we've been lucky, incredibly impossibly lucky. We were lucky that Vasily Arkhipov was on that submarine, that Stanislav Petrov was on duty that night, that Kennedy and Khrushchev made the decisions they did. We've been fortunate that false alarms haven't occurred during real crises when tensions were high, that human errors haven't coincided with technical failures at the wrong time, that irrational leaders haven't had access to nuclear weapons until now. But relying on luck for the survival of human civilization isn't a strategy. It's Russian roulette on a global scale. And eventually, statistically, inevitably, if we continue to play this game, luck will run out. After the missile crisis, there was hope that the world would take real steps toward eliminating nuclear weapons. The Partial Test Ban Treaty was a start. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, signed in 1968, was another step. Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty is clear. Each party to the treaty undertakes to engage in negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to the early cessation of the nuclear arms race and to nuclear disarmament. That was 1968. 57 years later, complete nuclear disarmament seems more distant than ever. There have been reductions. Arsenals are smaller than in the 1980s. But there are still enough weapons to destroy civilization many times over. And the political will for complete disarmament simply doesn't exist. Nuclear powers view their arsenals as security guarantees they won't relinquish as long as others possess them. It's a vicious cycle with no obvious way out. Some propose intermediate solutions, nuclear weapon-free zones, no first-use agreements, and reducing arsenals to deterrent minimums. These are valuable improvements, but they don't eliminate the fundamental risk. Others argue for complete abolition. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, adopted by the UN in 2017, declares nuclear weapons illegal under international law. 122 nations have signed it, but none of the 9 nuclear powers have signed it. And without their participation, the treaty is largely symbolic. The Cuban Missile Crisis posed a question we've never truly answered. Can humanity live indefinitely with the ability to self-destruct? For 63 years, we've answered yes by default, simply continuing with the nuclear status quo. But yes assumes that we can maintain perfect control over these weapons forever, that there will never be a fatal accident, that there will never be a truly irrational leader with access to nuclear weapons, that there will never be a misunderstanding that escalates out of control in minutes. It is an extraordinarily optimistic assumption. The alternative is to say no and work systematically toward a world without nuclear weapons. But this requires trust between nations that have historically been adversaries. It requires verification systems that everyone accepts. It requires alternative security that doesn't depend on the threat of mutual annihilation. It's extraordinarily difficult. But is it more difficult than living forever on the edge of a precipice? In 2023, a survey of young adults in the United States revealed something disturbing. More than 40% didn't know that the United States had used nuclear weapons against Japan in World War II. Many didn't even know what a nuclear bomb was. This is a generation that will inherit the problem of nuclear weapons. And many don't even know it exists. But some do know and are taking action. Young activists are reviving the nuclear disarmament movement, using social media and digital organizing to mobilize their generation. They argue that their generation has more at stake. They are the ones who will live with the consequences of the nuclear decisions made today. In 2022, at the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, youth activists from more than 50 countries presented a petition with over 1 million signatures demanding progress toward nuclear disarmament. Our generation didn't create this problem, said a 24-year-old activist from Mexico. but we inherited the responsibility to solve it. And if previous generations didn't have the courage to eliminate these weapons, then our generation will have to find that courage. It's a reminder that the history of nuclear weapons is not over. Each generation must decide what to do with this terrible legacy. Since 1947, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has maintained the doomsday clock, a symbolic representation of humanity's closeness to self-destruction. Midnight represents the apocalypse. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, although the clock was not updated in real time, scientists later estimated that humanity had been within 7 minutes of midnight. The clock has moved forward and backward for decades, reflecting the changing landscape of nuclear and other existential threats. In January 2023, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved the clock to 90 seconds to midnight. It's the closest it's ever been in its history, closer even than during the most tense moments of the Cold War. Scientists cited multiple reasons: the war in Ukraine and associated Russian nuclear threats, the arms control impasse, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, the growing risk of cyber attacks against nuclear systems, and climate change as a threat multiplier. 90 seconds to midnight, explained Rachel Bronson, president of the Bulletin, reflects our assessment that humanity faces an unprecedented level of danger. World leaders have allowed international safeguards against catastrophe to erode. It's a grim warning. More than 6 decades after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when humanity learned how close it could be to the brink, we are now even closer. The question is, will we listen this time? The Cuban Missile Crisis should have taught us lasting lessons, but forgotten lessons are as dangerous as those never learned. Lesson 1. Leaders don't have complete control during nuclear crises. Local commanders make decisions. Technical systems fail. Accidents happen. The complexity of modern military systems means that even with the best intentions, things can go wrong. This lesson seems forgotten as nuclear systems become increasingly automated, as decision-making times shorten, as reliance on technology increases. Lesson 2. Diplomacy and communication channels are essential. The hotline was installed specifically because the Cuban Missile Crisis demonstrated that leaders need to be able to communicate directly and quickly during crises. This lesson seems forgotten when arms control treaties collapse without replacement, when lines of communication between adversaries deteriorate, when mutual distrust increases. Lesson 3. Luck plays a huge role. The Cuban Missile Crisis had multiple moments where disaster was narrowly avoided thanks to individuals who made the right decisions under extreme pressure. This lesson seems forgotten when we treat the absence of nuclear war as evidence that systems work, rather than recognizing for what it is, extraordinary luck that we cannot assume will last indefinitely. Imagine if we could bring John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev back to the present. If we could show them the world of 2025, what would they think? They would be relieved that their decision to backtrack in October 1962 gave humanity an additional 63 years. That billions of people were born and lived lives that would never have existed if the crisis had escalated into nuclear war. But they would be horrified that the weapons still exist, that the arsenals, though reduced, are still sufficient to destroy civilization, that new nuclear powers have emerged, that the risks have increased with more complex technology and more actors. Kennedy, the president who had said, "In the final analysis, our most basic common bond is that we all inhabit this small planet," would wonder why humanity had not taken advantage of 60 years of relative peace to permanently eliminate this threat. Khrushchev, the leader who had written, "If we stretch the rope too far, there will come a time when we will no longer be able to let go," would warn that humanity is still stretching that rope, still playing with forces it cannot fully control. The two men, ideological adversaries who nonetheless found ways to avert catastrophe when it mattered, would likely be united in one message: we gave them time. What have they done with it? Those of us alive today have a responsibility to those yet to be born, to future generations who deserve to inherit a habitable planet, not a radioactive wasteland. We have a responsibility to those who died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain, that their testimonies of horror lead humanity to choose a different path. We have a responsibility to those like Vasily Arkhipov and Stanislav Petrov, unsung heroes who saved the world, to honor their decisions by making it unnecessary for anyone else to have to make such decisions in the future. And we have a responsibility to ourselves, to our generation, not to be the one that ultimately exhausts the fate of humanity. This responsibility is not abstract. It translates into concrete actions. Demand that our leaders prioritize nuclear disarmament and nuclear risk management, support arms control treaties, and diplomacy over militarism, educate young generations about the dangers of nuclear weapons, support organizations working to eliminate nuclear weapons, vote for leaders who take the nuclear threat seriously. But more fundamentally, it requires humanity to do something it has never been good at. Think long-term. Value the survival of the species over short-term political gain. Choose cooperation over competition when the alternative is mutual annihilation. Let's try to imagine a different future. Not the apocalypse that almost happened, but the peace that could be. It's the year 2050. 88 years have passed since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the world has fundamentally changed. The last nuclear weapon was dismantled in 2042 in a ceremony at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The leaders of the former nuclear powers were present, recognizing together that humanity had finally taken a step it should have taken decades earlier. The process wasn't easy. It took 20 years of negotiations, trust-building verification systems, and alternative security arrangements. There were setbacks and crises, but each step forward made the next easier. Now, children learn about nuclear weapons in history classes, just as they learn about other obsolete and dangerous technologies that humanity once possessed but had the wisdom to abandon. Resources once spent maintaining nuclear arsenals are now invested in real challenges: climate change, poverty, disease, education. Nuclear scientists now work on peaceful fusion energy instead of weapons. International crises still occur. Conflicts still erupt, but no longer under the shadow of possible mutual annihilation. Leaders can negotiate without the pressure of nuclear timers. Mistakes no longer have the potential to end civilization. It's a safer world. Not perfect, but safer. And the question they ask themselves in 2050 is, why did it take so long? This future isn't inevitable, nor is the apocalypse we previously imagined. The future of nuclear weapons, the destiny of human civilization, is not written in stone. It is not predetermined. It is not the inevitable outcome of historical forces beyond our control. It's a choice every generation must make, a choice our generation must make now. We can choose to continue on the current path, maintaining nuclear arsenals indefinitely, hoping for continued luck, assuming that systems will never fail catastrophically, that leaders will always make rational decisions, that accidents will never escalate out of control. It's a gamble, and gambles can work for a long time until they don't. And when this gamble fails, there will be no second chance, or we can choose a different path. Work systematically toward a world without nuclear weapons. Build security systems that do not depend on threats of mutual genocide. Invest in diplomacy and confidence building. Create robust verification mechanisms. Develop international norms against nuclear weapons as strong as those against chemical and biological weapons. It won't be easy. It will require political courage. It will require leaders of adversarial nations to trust enough to verify, but not so much as to be naive. It will require decades of sustained work. But it is possible. We know it is possible because we have eliminated other weapons before, because we have solved other seemingly impossible global problems, because human beings, when faced with clear existential threats, have demonstrated an ability to cooperate across borders. The question isn't whether we can do it. It's whether we will choose to do it. October 2062, 100 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Historians of the future will look back on our era and ask a simple question. After humanity nearly destroyed itself in 1962, after it was given a second chance, what did it do with it? Did he use those extra decades to permanently eliminate the threat? Or did he simply hope his luck would last until it inevitably didn't? The answer depends on us, on the choices we make now, on the leaders we elect, on the policies we support, on whether we allow complacency to make us forget how close we've come to the brink. The Cuban Missile Crisis is not just history. It's a warning, a reminder A lesson every generation must relearn. It's the story of how humanity almost ended and how, by the grace of a few brave individuals and a little bit of luck, it didn't. But the story isn't over. The final chapter has yet to be written, and all of us who are alive now, are the authors of that final chapter. We look back at October 1962 and see 13 days that changed the world. 13 days when humanity stood on the brink of the abyss and, at the last moment, took a step back. 63 years later, we still live in the shadow of those 13 days. We still face the same fundamental questions. We still possess the weapons that could end it all. But we also have something Kennedy and Khrushchev didn't have: the perspective of 63 more years, the knowledge of how many more times we've been on the brink, the understanding of how fragile our survival truly is. And we have a choice that they didn't have the opportunity to fully make. We can choose to end this story differently, not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with a deliberate, thoughtful, courageous decision that humanity will no longer live under the threat of self-annihilation. It's possible, it's necessary, it's urgent, and it begins with each of us understanding that this isn't just history. It's our present, and it will be our future, for better or worse. The 13 days of October of 1962 gave us time. What will we do with it? The clock is ticking. The decision is ours. And time, as always, is running out. But it's not midnight yet. There's still time, if we choose to use it wisely. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The story of 13 days on the brink of apocalypse. The story of how humanity almost ended, and how, by grace and luck, it survived. But more than anything, it's an unfinished story. A story that continues every day that nuclear weapons exist. A story whose end we don't yet know. Because the Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't an isolated event in the past. It was a moment in a much longer history of humankind's ability to create weapons that can destroy us, and our ongoing struggle to control those weapons before they control us. In October 1962, John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev faced the most important decision in human history, and they made the right decision. Now, each generation must make its own decision about what kind of world we want, about how much risk we are willing to accept, about whether we value our survival as a species enough to make the sacrifices necessary to ensure it. The story of the Cuban Missile Crisis is, ultimately, a story of choices, of moments when individuals had to decide between the easy path and the right path, between pride and prudence, between victory and survival. And every time someone chose survival, every time someone chose to step back from the edge, we were given one more day. 13 days in October 1962 turned into 63 years. 63 years can turn into 100 years, into 1,000 years, into an endless future where humanity has finally learned to live without the threat of self-destruction, but only if we choose to do so. The clock strikes 90 seconds to midnight. Every second counts. Every choice matters. And the story continues. The unleashing of the power of the atom has changed everything except the way we think. The solution to this problem lies within the heart of humanity. If only I had known I would become a watchmaker. Albert Einstein. We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Martin Luther King Jr. There are currently approximately 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world. You only need one to get started, and 90 minutes to finish everything. The choice is ours.